My brother's laughter still rings in my ears from that day in the lawyer's office. "You got the old dump," he sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. "I got the empire. Dad's $4 million business is mine. You got a house that's falling apart." The other relative shifted uncomfortably. Josh didn't care. He never did. But what my brother didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was what Dad had really hidden inside those old walls. By the time Josh figured it out, it would be far too late. Dad had played the long game and I was about to win. My father died on a Tuesday morning in March. Heart attack sudden. He was 68 years old. And up until that moment, I thought he'd live forever. The funeral was held at Riverside Methodist Church in Asheville, North Carolina, the same church where he married my mother 35 years ago. She'd passed 6 years prior, and I think part of him died with her that day. I arrived early. The church smelled like lilies and old wood. I sat in the front pew alone, staring at the closed casket draped in an American flag. Dad was a veteran. He'd served in Vietnam, came home, and built a printing business from nothing. By the time I was born, it was already thriving. By the time Josh came along 3 years later, it was a $1 million operation. Josh arrived late. Naturally, he swept in wearing a $3,000 suit. Tom Ford probably. He didn't cry. He shook hands like he was networking at a conference. I watched him work the room, playing the grieving son while checking his phone between condolences. That was Josh, always performing. We'd never been close. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the one who liked books and fixing things with my hands. Josh was the star, captain of the football team, homecoming king, Dad's pride and joy. Every Sunday dinner, Dad would ask Josh about his sales numbers, his client meetings, his next big deal. He'd turn to me and say, "And how's the house coming along?" Like, my life was just a side project. The will reading happened 3 days later at the office of Morrison and Associates, the estate attorneys Dad had used for decades. The mahogany conference table was too big for just the four of us. Me, Josh, Mr. Harrison, the attorney, and Dad's accountant, Rita. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and began reading. The language was formal, legal, cold. Then came the distribution of assets. "To my son Joshua, I leave my business, Campbell Printing Solutions, including all assets, client contracts, and operations valued at approximately $4 million. Josh leaned back in his chair, grinning. He'd expected this. He deserved it, he probably thought. "To my son Daniel," Mr. Harrison continued, and I held my breath. "I leave the family home at 17 Oak Street, Asheville, North Carolina." Silence. Then Josh laughed. Actually laughed out loud. "The old house. That's it. That place is worth what? $200,000 if he's lucky." He looked at me with something between pity and contempt. "Guess we know who Dad's real son was, huh?" I didn't respond. I just sat there feeling the familiar sting of being second place. Mr. Harrison looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Rita wouldn't meet my eyes. I signed the papers in silence, shook the attorney's hand, and walked out. Behind me, I could hear Josh already on the phone telling someone about his inheritance, his empire, his future. I drove to the old house that night. I hadn't planned to, but I needed to be somewhere that felt like it still held pieces of Dad. The house sat at the end of a quiet street lined with oak trees that Dad had planted when I was 5. It was a modest 2-story craftsman with a wraparound porch built in 1952. The paint was peeling. The shutters needed repair. I could see why Josh called it a dump. But standing there in the driveway, I remembered summer evenings on that porch. Dad teaching me how to use a level, how to read a tape measure, how to fix things instead of replacing them. I let myself in. The air inside was stale. Everything looked exactly as Dad had left it. His reading glasses on the side table, a half-finished crossword puzzle, the smell of his coffee still faintly lingering. I walked through the room slowly, touching familiar things, remembering a childhood that felt both distant and immediate. His bedroom was upstairs at the end of the hall. I stood in the doorway for a long time before entering. The bed was made, military corners just like he'd always done it. I started going through his things, not really knowing what I was looking for. Clothes to donate, papers to sort, something to make sense of why he'd given me so little. That's when I found it. I was moving his dresser to vacuum behind it when I heard the sound. A hollow thump, different from the solid thud of furniture against drywall. I knocked on the wall. Hollow. I knocked 2 feet to the left. Solid. Back to the hollow spot. My heart started racing. I examined the baseboards and found a section that looked slightly different. The paint newer. I pried it loose with a screwdriver from Dad's nightstand. Behind it was a small metal panel with a keypad. The kind you'd see on a safe. I stared at it for a full minute, my mind racing. Then I tried the only number that made sense. Mom's birthday, 072356. The panel clicked open. Inside was a fireproof safe small enough to fit in the wall cavity. Inside the safe were 3 things. A sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's handwriting, a folder full of documents, and a small brass key with a tag that read First National Bank, Box 217. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. The letter was written on Dad's personal stationery, dated 2 months before he died. "Daniel," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone and you found what I needed you to find. I'm sorry for the confusion at the will reading. I'm sorry if Josh made you feel small, but I need you to understand something. This was never about money. This was about knowing my sons." He went on to explain that he'd watched us both our entire lives. He'd seen Josh's ambition, his charisma, his talent for business. He'd also seen his arrogance, his inability to hear advice, his belief that success came from swagger rather than strategy. "I'm giving Josh the business because he expects it," Dad wrote. "And I need to know if he can handle it without me or if he was just riding on my reputation." Then he wrote about me. "You were always different, Daniel. You never needed the spotlight. You learned by watching. You asked questions. You fixed things instead of throwing them away. You reminded me of myself at your age before the world made me harder." The letter explained that the house was only the visible part of my inheritance. The real gift was in the safe deposit box at First National Bank downtown. "I've been setting money aside for you since you were 10 years old," he wrote. "Stocks, bonds, a trust fund. Everything I didn't want Josh to know about because if he knew, he'd expect half. This is yours. You've earned it by being the son who never asked for anything." The letter ended simply, "Make me proud. Love, Dad." I sat on his bedroom floor and cried for the first time since he died. The next morning, I drove to First National Bank with the key and the documentation from the folder. The bank manager, a woman named Mrs. Chen, led me to the vault. Box 217 was larger than I expected. Inside were folders organized by year, each containing stock certificates, bond statements, and account records. There were also USB drives with digital copies of everything. Mrs. Chen helped me inventory it all in a private room. When we finished, she looked at me with something like respect and said, "Your father was a very wise man." The total value of the inheritance in that box was $3.2 million. I called Mr. Harrison from the bank parking lot. "Did you know about this?" I asked. There was a pause. "Your father told me about it 6 months ago," he admitted. "He made me promise not to say anything until you found it yourself. He said if you didn't find it, then maybe Josh was right about you after all. And if I did find it, then you'd prove you were the son he believed you were." I sat in my car for an hour just processing everything. Dad hadn't forgotten me. He trusted me. Josh called me 2 weeks after the funeral. I was at the house repainting the porch when my phone rang. "Hey, little brother," he said, his voice full of that familiar condescension. "Just wanted to let you know I closed my first deal as CEO, $200,000 contract with a regional healthcare network. Not bad for week 1, right?" "Congratulations," I said flatly. "Yeah, well, you know how it is. Some of us are built for this. Hey, how's the fixer-upper coming? You going to flip it or just live in Dad's shadow forever?" I didn't take the bait. "I'm keeping it." He laughed. "Your funeral man. Listen, I got to run client dinner. You know how it is. Actually, you don't." Later, he hung up. I went back to painting. I didn't tell him about the money. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I did what Dad had taught me. I watched. I listened. And I learned. I followed Campbell Printing Solutions on LinkedIn. I checked the industry news. I asked around quietly among people who knew the business and slowly a picture emerged. Josh was making mistakes. Big ones. In his first month, he fired 3 senior employees who'd been with Dad for over 15 years. He called them dead weight. Those 3 employees took their client relationships with them to a competitor. In month 2, Josh invested heavily in new digital printing equipment without doing market research. The machine sat unused because he'd misread the demand. By month 3, the company had lost 2 of its 5 largest clients. The calls started around then. "Hey Dan, quick question about Dad's old contacts. You remember the guy from the hospital network?" I'd give vague answers, unhelpful ones. Then the calls changed tone. "Look, I could use some advice on the machinery." Dad never really explained his system. I'd tell him I didn't know anything about the business, which was true. Dad had never taught me that side. 6 months in, Josh called at 11 at night. I could hear the panic in his voice. "Danny, I need a loan. Just short-term $50,000. The business is going through a transition and I need to cover payroll while some invoices clear. I don't have $50,000. "Josh, come on. You could get a loan against the house. I'll pay you back with interest." "No, no. Are you serious right now? I'm your brother. Dad would want you to help me." That made me angry. "Dad left you a $4 million company. He left me a house. If you can't make the company work, that's not my problem. You're a piece of work. You know that? Always jealous. Always bitter. This is why Dad gave me the real inheritance." I hung up. The calls kept coming. Once a week, then twice a week, then daily. The amounts he needed kept growing. $75,000, 100,000, 200,000. Each time his voice got more desperate, I said no. Every time I watched from a distance as Campbell Printing Solutions began to crumble, more employees left. Clients didn't renew contracts. Industry message boards started talking about the company's decline. Ever since the old man died, one comment read, "The place has gone downhill fast." 9 months after Dad died, Josh called me one last time. He wasn't asking for money anymore. "I'm losing the business," he said quietly. "I have to file for bankruptcy. The creditors are coming after everything. The house, the cars, everything. I don't know what to do." "You could have asked for help earlier," I said. "You could have listened to the people who knew more than you. You could have been humble." "Is this you gloating? Is that what this is?" "No, Joshua, this is me telling you the truth. Dad didn't give you that business because he thought you'd succeed. He gave it to you to see what you'd do with it. It was a test and you failed." Silence then. "And you? What did he give you?" "Exactly what I needed." I hung up for the last time. 3 weeks later, Campbell Printing Solutions declared bankruptcy. Josh lost everything. The business was sold for parts. The proceeds went to creditors. My brother, the golden child, was left with nothing but debt, and a very expensive lesson. It's been 2 years since Dad died. The house on Oak Street is fully renovated now. I repainted every room, fixed the porch, replaced the roof, and restored the gardens Mom used to tend. It's worth significantly more than the 200,000 Josh estimated. But I'm not selling. This is home. I used part of Dad's inheritance wisely. I invested in index funds like he'd taught himself to do. I paid off my debts. I started a small carpentry business building custom furniture for clients across North Carolina. It's not a $4 million empire, but it's mine and it's sustainable and I love the work. Josh and I don't talk. I heard through a cousin that he moved to Charlotte, got a job in sales at someone else's company, and is slowly rebuilding. Part of me feels bad for him. Part of me thinks he needed to fall. Maybe someday we'll reconcile. Maybe not. Either way, I'm at peace. Last month, I drove out to Riverside Cemetery where Dad and Mom are buried side by side. I brought flowers, Mom's favorite, white roses. I sat on the bench near their headstones, and told Dad everything. I told him I found the safe. I told him I understood why he did what he did. I told him I forgave him for all the years I felt invisible. "You were teaching me the whole time, weren't you?" I said aloud. "You weren't ignoring me. You were preparing me." The wind rustled through the oak trees. Somewhere nearby, a cardinal sang. I sat there for an hour just feeling close to him again. Dad's real gift wasn't the money, though I'm grateful for it. His real gift was teaching me that worth isn't measured by how much you inherit, but by what you do with what you're given. He taught me patience. He taught me humility. He taught me that the loudest person in the room isn't always the wisest. Josh got what he wanted. I got what I needed. And in the end, that made all the difference. Dad knew his sons better than we knew ourselves. He gave each of us exactly what we deserved. Not in money, but in lessons. And I finally understand that the greatest inheritance isn't what you receive, it's what you become. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a family inheritance situation? How did it change your relationships? Share your story and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life tales about family, justice, and the lessons that shape us.